Hi, welcome back to my reading corner. Get yourself a cozy blanket and maybe a cozy pillow, or maybe both, and let's read. We've been reading When the Dandelions Sing, and today we're on chapter 5. So let's dig in, get comfy. Chapter 5, The Loss. The day Granddad passed, Grammy was keeping herself as busy as she could, talking to Mama about how she had to stay in the front porch soon, wanting to fix the fence at the right rear corner of the yard that had sagged, and just about everything and anything else she could think of. Mama knew she was hurting deep inside and trying to cover that, so she just nodded and would say things like, "Mom, I think that's a good idea. We should get the wood for that fence and get to it later next week." Grammy would just nod in agreement and look around earnestly for more trivial projects, almost like in a trance. She continued to talk and fuss, and then Mama interjected. "Mom, shall I make the calls to Serenity Funeral Home to get Dad picked up and taken over? I can handle the calls and prepare the funeral. I can do that." Yes, that's fine. You do that. I want to go over to the lumber yard before they close and get that wood. And that porch stain. People always pick off the good straight wood quickly. There's always so much to do around here, and I want to get a start on things. So you handle that, and I'll get going on this. Grammy walked over to her dusty old pickup truck, the one Granddad drove almost daily with her into town, opening the squeaking driver's side door, looking off to the yard where Granddad had spent so many hot summers, and paused. She just stood there for a moment, seemingly collecting herself, and then she got in, started it up, and drove away. She wanted to just forget today, forget the last weeks, to be honest. Granddad had been sick for several weeks, but he kept telling Grammy he would be just fine, and not to worry herself at all. He was a tough SOB, he told her. I had no idea what a tough SOB was. But he was, whatever that was, for sure. Smiling each day she was with him, he seemed perfectly content with it all. Only he knew the pain he was in, and he masked it well. Granddad knew Grammy, and Mama for that matter, needed to think he was okay, that he was going to be, by some means, pull through, and that he was in no pain whatsoever. So he continued to hide the savage pain he felt, and when the doctors told them it was getting close, that they should prepare for the inevitable worst-case scenario, Grammy was dumbfounded. How was this possible? He was simply fine. He had told her that he was fine. There was no nagging pain, no type of discomfort through his sturdy body. In her mind, they were back home on the porch, swinging lazily, talking about retirement one day, speaking about how many grandkids they had hoped to have in their golden years, sipping ice-cold lemonade while bouncing the newest grandkid off their knees. But the truth was, Granddad knew. He knew his life was coming to a sudden end. He knew the pain was unbearable, and that at any moment one of these hellos and goodbyes we all too often take for granted would be the last to travel from his lips. So he decided, when he knew what was to come, that he would make no one else suffer alongside him. He wanted to make those around him as happy and purely relaxed as he could, because he knew it would be hard. That was a terrible understatement. He was Grammy's reason for waking in the morning, and her reason she slept so peacefully at night, and she needed him. Mama needed him too, because she was raising us by herself, and Granddad became somewhat of a father to us all. Granddad was a genuine, kind, and strong man, and even though he carried around that horrible regret from all those years ago, he had been forgiving, though he could never fully forgive himself. The parents of that little boy, Frederick, had known their son was hanging with a mischievous group of kids. They tried to keep him in that evening, but he snuck out once again through his narrow bedroom window. They knew, and they knew Granddad's family. The stories about him in the war, doing unspeakable things to save those around him with such bravery, and how he was a good, sturdy, honest family man. They held no grudge, and although they missed their boy, they fought for no charges to be pressed and were somehow successful. Granddad was always amazed by this. Excuse me. He never understood how someone who had just lost a child could feel so strangely forgiving to the man who had removed him from their world. But that was how it was. Now, he didn't have to carry that guilt and sadness any longer. He didn't have to feel sorrowful or angry or pain at all. He was free of all that. And now we were all left sad, angry, and in pain. We missed him terribly. Mamma called Mr. Murphy at the funeral home, and I could hear her whisper to him a faint thank you. My guess was that he was telling her he was sorry for her family's loss, as so many others would over the next week. People apparently say that when someone dies, sorry for your loss. It seems honestly appropriate, but this was not just any rudimentary loss. This was Granddad. People needed him, and I don't think they understood that well enough. But Mama was nice anyway, even though she needed Granddad as much as Grammy did. I needed him. He gave me those pale silver cufflinks after all, and I still didn't have the slightest idea how or when to wear them. He took me on long hikes through dry leaves and wet skies in the early fall, when Davy and his pals wouldn't let me tag along on those crisp spring days. Who would take me on those hikes now? Not Davy, that's for sure. This wasn't good, and I was sad, bitter. Mama needed me, though, so I tried to do some things while she talked on the phone. I dusted the dining room table to a shine, even though it didn't look as if it needed any dusting. I went to the kitchen to fetch a hard-bristled broom so I could sweep the bare wood floor where she could see me in plain view. I wanted her to see I was trying, that I could be the man of the house, sure enough. Well, when Davy wasn't home, I could. Maybe I could get a job and help pay the bills. Granddad told me how he had worked from time to time when he was just a little boy. Why couldn't I? A paper route, maybe, just until I became a professional baseball player, like Eric Davis, just like him. Then I would make a ton of money and have my picture on one of those thin cardboard trading cards, as Granddad called them. Kids would run to the store and hope to get my card with my picture on it. They wouldn't trade my card, ever. Nope, they would keep mine in a small brown shoebox with the top tattered. I could buy Mama a house of her very own, and she could decorate it with gold-colored flower print photos, and we would all live together forever in that house. Grammy could come along, and she would always tell people about her grandson Jasper, the professional baseball player for the Cincinnati Reds. Ronnie, do me a favor, please. Can you go in the other room and fetch Mama my pen and paper, please, honey? Mama asked. Yes, Mama, I will, and I'll be right back, I responded. The church was St. Augustine's. We had gone there each Sunday for as long as I could remember. It was a small, humble church, featuring dull granite with slivers of silver and copper throughout, from top to bottom, with a simple white crucifix at the peak. The doors were painted a deep red, and when you walked in, it always smelled funny, like a cinnamon incense type of scent. Or maybe the holy water had a smell to it. Either way, I knew the smell from the parking lot before we entered through the doors. When we walked in, everyone was quiet. There were a few older men standing around in the back, smiling, shaking hands, all wearing dark-colored suits. To the left of the center aisle were a few rows with people milling around in them, and then a seemingly on purpose break between people for several rows, then more people. I walked to the front with Davy, Janet, and Thelma Louise, and Mama, who was leading the way. Mama looked at me and straightened my tie, licked her fingers, and placed them on top of my head with a slight push to pat down my hair, and told me to slide into my seat there in the hard wooden pews. I hated the tie. I hated the suit. Mama had a friend who had lent it to her for me because I didn't own one of my own. Didn't fit quite right, though. The collar crept upwards, and it was a little long in the sleeves, so I fidgeted with it all the way until we got to our pew. Then Mama told me to sit still, and so I tried my best. Davy played with his tie, 'cause he didn't like them much either. He kept loosening it with 2 fingers while stretching his neck as far from it as possible, and Mama just kept tightening it. Janet and Thelma Louise wore printed dresses with flowers down the front and sides. Janet's was a pale yellow dress with light pink flowers, while Thelma Louise wore a white dress that had blue and green flowers on the bottom half and a fancy gold stripe pattern around the top. They didn't have to wear a stupid tie, and I felt that was unfair. But Mama told me girls don't need to wear ties. That was the only time I have ever wished I were a girl, so I didn't need to wear a dumb, stupid tie. I looked over at the different people on the other side of the old church, and they were just looking straight forward, all quiet. I didn't know what they were looking at until I looked up to the front of the church where the priest was calmly standing around. He wasn't wearing a tie either. Seems like many people weren't. Where he was standing, there was a long, curved, shiny wood box type of thing, and I was trying to see what was in it. I couldn't see from where I was seated, and the fact I was still small, so I asked Davy. "Davy, what's in that box up there where that priest is?" "Shh," Davy said. "It's Granddad. Now sit and be quiet. I don't want Mama getting all upset again." What did he mean that was Granddad? I thought he was dead. Maybe he's just playing with me, pulling my leg. I stretched outwardly towards the box to get a better look without standing, but the box was on top of some metal silver thing with small black wheels, and it was just too high for me to see. When Janet saw what I was doing, she switched spots with Davy and slid down to where I was, leaning in towards me. "Ronnie, it's okay. It's Granddad. When we die, they put us in a box like that one called a casket. People can walk up and say their goodbyes this way, and then they close the lid and bury you in the ground. The box protects your body and lets you look handsome for those around you," she explained. "Why? Why does his body need to be protected? Isn't he already dead?" I asked, confused. "Well, yes, he is dead. However, I don't know, Ronnie. I guess they just protect it, so when you go to visit them at the cemetery, you picture that they are still the same person they were when they died. Like, they didn't change. If they were all covered in dirt, they may be eaten by worms and such. No one wants to picture them like that, right?" Well, she was right, but I had seen worms in my yard and built them great big houses like those big palaces in town. I never had a worm try to eat me. I never even had a worm try to bite me. I don't think they have teeth, do they? I was only getting more confused as the morning went on. Granddad was in that box, so people could say goodbye to him, although he couldn't say goodbye back. Then they would close the lid, and it would be all dark in there. Why did he need a suit on then? After that, they put the wooden box or casket thing Janet had told me into the ground, covered it with dirt, and then left. Then people would still come by and say hi to him occasionally. None of it made any sense. Janet just held my hand tightly and told me not to worry. I would understand more when I get older. Mama was always telling me that I would understand more as I get older. Well, I wish I had a pad of paper to write all that stuff down, because someone would have a lot of answers to give me when I was old enough. Grammy was talking to some old guys just a few rows away, and she was nodding a lot. She wasn't really talking as much as she was listening. Grammy always talked a lot. She always had things to say, but lately she wasn't saying a whole heck of a lot. Here she was just nodding and listening. Her dress was deep black below her knees, and she had a dark purple jacket over top. Her hair was naturally curly and shorter, but it looked like she had a fancier hairdo that day. It was still sterling gray, but it looked different. She looked over our way and caught me staring at her. When she looked directly at me, she just winked nonchalantly and turned back to the nodding and listening again. The men were holding hats in their fists, clenched tightly around the brims, and they were looking down at Grammy, because she was much shorter than they were. I remember they were all old-looking, unkempt gray hairs going in different directions, as if trying to avoid one another, and they wore dull shirts and dark print ties, but mostly no suits. One had an ashy-colored green uniform on, and silver and gold-looking pins on his chest. His hat differed from any I had seen before, but he still held it in his hands, like the other men nearby. He was standing taller than the others, even though he was not the tallest, looking almost straight, but his eyes were lowered at Grant as Grammy just nodded. When she finished talking to the men, she smiled at them, thanked them, and walked towards the row we were sitting in. Mama just looked at her when Grammy sat next to her and laid her head on Grammy's shoulder. Grammy put her hardened hands on her head and kissed it. They sat like that for a few moments until the music started up. Then the priest started singing in a deep-toned way, but I couldn't understand what he was singing. He had a strange, raspy voice, and it didn't seem like words coming from his mouth, but I guess they had to be. He put his hand over Granddad's box and looked down at him and prayed. Everyone else in the church bowed their heads. I didn't, though. I just watched, as I wanted to see what people were doing. Some people were sniffling, as if they were about to shed tears, and some looked more like they were asleep. No expression whatsoever. I looked at Grammy and Mama. They were sniffling for sure. Even Thelma Louise was crying. Mama, still with her head resting heavily on Grammy's shoulder, placed a free hand on Thelma Louise's hand, without looking in her direction, and held it tight. Thelma Louise squeezed Mama tightly back and wiped away the tears from her eyes with her other hand. Davy wasn't crying. He had his eyes closed and was looking down, but he wasn't crying. He looked like he was mumbling something to himself, but I couldn't really tell. Almost like he was talking to someone, but didn't want anyone else around him to know. Janet still had a soft grasp on my hand, and she had her head lowered, but she knew I was looking around. Maybe she felt my hand slightly move as I looked left and right, and behind and to the front. She could feel I was fidgeting in place, so she just squeezed a little firmer. It was then I closed my eyes and said a prayer, just like everyone else seemed to be doing. I wanted Granddad back, but I didn't think that was the prayer to say. So I just said, God, take care of my Granddad and keep him safe. Please don't let the worms get to him, and even I don't know why they would want to. And keep Grammy happy. I know she misses him terribly, she does, so keep her safe. Mama and I need her. When the priest was finished with his prayer and singing and talking, he asked if anyone wanted to come up and say a few final words about Walt. Funny, I had forgotten that was Granddad's other name. A man in a slightly wrinkled beige shirt with a chocolate brown tie, too short for his body, stood up, walked over to where the priest was, and asked the priest if it was okay to say a few words. The priest told him it was. He had literally just said that was what this time was for, so I wasn't sure why the man asked, but he did. Hello, everyone. My name is Clinton Johnson. I met Walt under awful circumstances for sure. My boy Frederick, you see. Well, anyhow, Walt was a good man. He always tried his darndest to do whatever he could for people, and he was sure that way with me. For years after I lost my only boy, the man paused here, and I thought for a minute he might not go on. But then he did go on. Walt would come by and do work on my house, even without my asking. He would fix a fence post, or nail a loose board back again for me, or paint a shutter. He never wanted anything from me that I had not already given him. He just kept doing this for years. When we finally moved away, old Walt asked if he could buy the house from us, and so we thought that was a splendid idea. We figured he had already done so much work to the house that it made sense to just give him the house for whatever he could afford. My wife and I are firm believers in giving back, and Walt we loved. Anyhow, I just wanted to say that. Then he looked over at Granddad, walked to the box, placed his hand on what I assume was Granddad's hand, and said, "Walt, old buddy, you're free. It cannot hurt you any more. I wish it never had. Will you do me this one favor? Will you say hi to Frederick for us? Tell him we're sorry and we love him and we will see him when it's our time. Can you do that for me, Walt? Thank you. Thanks." He shuffled off with painfully sad eyes, all red and watery, and sat back down next to a woman who I assume was his wife. She smiled warmly at her husband and touched his cheek with the inside of her palm and then kissed him on his forehead. Then he smiled and looked over at Grammy, and she nodded back and mouthed what appeared to be "thank you." Only I had no idea what was going on. I guess this was one of those times I would need to ask when I was old enough. I really needed that pad and pen. It was going on my list of things to do when I got back home. A few more people went up, and they talked and told stories about times they remembered Granddad helping them, or about times they had worked together, or that time when he did this or that, when the weather was bad or the roads were closed. People just told stories, and I knew none of them. I may have seen them in town, say hi to Granddad while we walked side by side, but I knew none of these people well. Then the man with the dull green suit with the shiny metal things on his chest and the different black hat walked up. He didn't look at anyone on his way to the front. He just looked straight ahead like he had a purpose. He shook hands firmly with the priest and turned around in a single strong motion, and at first looked where Granddad was, then back to the people. He was a medium-sized man, but he looked strong and notably serious. He didn't smile, nor did he look upset. He just looked straight, and with a deep, sturdy voice, he began, "I'm Master Sergeant Hollingsworth of the United States Army. I served with Corporal McFarland while overseas back in 1942 and 1943. Corporal McFarland Walter was a good soldier, but a better man. He saw a lot of unbalance together while we were there, and we decided to leave what we saw there behind us. Walter once told me that until he died, he didn't want to ever mention what we had been through, and I said the same. It was not easy for us, and we were just boys trying to make our country safe and get home to our lives again, to our families we left behind, not knowing we were returning so different, so transformed, so full of emotions. Walter, he never wanted credit for anything he'd done. He simply wanted to do his job, get home to his wife, and raise a family. It's all he talked about, day and night." The man in the green suit paused again and looked over at Grammy this time. He began again. "Ma'am, your Walter, your Walt, he saved a lot of men. He saved me. We were pinned down deep. Enemy fire was whizzing all around, and we were running low on ammo. Walter was just north of us and knew we were under fire. It was getting dark, except for the crimson sky, and old Walter had to act fast. Without thought for his own survival, he took as much ammo as he could carry, ran through enemy fire, over several dead soldiers that had already given their lives for the fight, and into the hole we were pinned down in. Walter dropped the ammo, and as we loaded, he quickly rose up and fired round after round after round into the fading red night, screaming at the top of his lungs. He was angry that they had pinned us down and kept firing. He thought that was unfair, and even though it was a war, he still felt it wasn't right. Walter couldn't stand an unfair fight. By the time he was almost out of ammo, we had all loaded back up and resumed the fight. It was enough to save all of us, and Walter didn't need to do that. He was in an advanced position, went against orders to stay put and stand down, took his life in his hands to save some guys from Iowa. I never forgot that. I would not be here. For the first time, the man who had been like a rock since walking into the church had trouble speaking and standing as straight as he had just a moment before. He didn't continue. He simply walked over to Granddad, said something I couldn't hear, took one of the metal things he had on his chest off, and placed it where Granddad was laying. He then went over to Grammy, and he knelt down beside her and said, "Ma'am, thank you for sharing Walter with us. I will never forget him, nor you for your generosity. I want to give you this." He took something from his top pocket, looked at it, rolled it around in his palm and between his thick fingers, then handed it to Grammy. "Please, accept this as a token of my appreciation. I am truly sorry for your loss." Woo! That was a tough one on the Nan heart today. Well, that's the end of chapter 5. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I hope you'll join me tomorrow for another chapter. And as always, love, Nan. Bye.